Manishi, what would be your sum up of what the finance minister had to say, more from a macro standpoint than what he doled out in terms of the micro details?
Right. So let me first concentrate on the macro issues that we talked about. See, when the first came out, the numbers came out and he declared a 5.1% fiscal deficit, we all thought that this was being realistic and this was possibly the best that the finance minister could do under the given circumstances where, he is basically walking a tightrope. And the good part was that he had bitten the bullet on increasing the excise duties and the service tax and widening the service tax net, which obviously could bring in more revenues. Now, but when you look through the details, there's one thing that really concerns me, and that is the assumption on the expenditure side, particularly the subsidies. On oil subsidies, about 430 billion rupees have been assumed, if I'm not mistaken. I saw that number flashing on your channel as well. And I think on fertilizer subsidies, somewhere close to 680 to 685 billion rupees have been assumed. I think these are the primary areas of concerns because these are where the slippages could occur. Take oil subsidy, for example. I mean, this year the government's share would be somewhere around 700 to 750 billion. And next year the number could turn out to be the same. But in addition, there could be another carry forward oil subsidy from this year to the next year, which could be somewhere close to about 200 billion. So if you add all this up, and if you consider that the fertilizer subsidy could be somewhere close to 800 billion, then just on the subsidy assumptions alone, there could be a slippage of somewhere close to 500 to 600 billion rupees, and that is, somewhere close to about 0.5% of GDP. So it may happen that until unless we overachieve on the revenue side, that 5.1% fiscal deficit as proportion of GDP could turn out to be closer to 5.5%. And I think, that is something that the market is possibly not expecting, or maybe over the last half an hour or 1 hour or so, the market is possibly just awakening to the possibility that there could be some significant slippages as well this year. Maybe not as high as the slippage last year in fiscal 12, but there could be some significant slippage this year as well.
Sectorally, of all that you've analyzed, what to your mind was probably the top positive? I mean, the market is probably giving ITC or some of the auto names by virtue of the fact that there was not too much of tinkering with diesel, the thumbs up, and oil and gas, a negative, thumbs down. What to your mind was probably the biggest positive and the biggest negative?
Well, I think on the macro side, the biggest positive is the ability to increase taxes, both excise duty and service tax, and to widen the tax net, which I think over the longer term indicates that there's a desire to increase the tax to GDP ratio, there's a desire to increase compliance, and therefore, just to increase the revenue contribution over the longer term. So that I think is the long-term positive. And add to that the fact that he has again brought back FRBM as a measure of discipline into the budget. The biggest negative are possibly, just what I highlighted, that the subsidy assumptions still seem unrealistic unless the finance minister is able to assume an equalization between the international crude prices and the domestic crude prices, and that seems politically very difficult to do at this point of time. And there are certain sector-specific negatives that have come through, like the increase in cess on crude oil, which obviously impacts the oil sector negatively. And, there are possibly a few sectors like this excise duty increase could possibly impact domestic demand, though I would think that would be marginal. But I think in the near term, the negative impact would be possibly on oil and to some extent on the banks, because gradually the market would read into this the fact that the government's borrowing program could actually turn out to be higher than that 5 trillion that he has declared. And that would obviously lead to some more round of crowding out of private investment, reduced credit growth for the banking universe, and so on.